I guess that's it. Everyone can hear me? That joke just works for so many times. This is a little bit of a different presentation. Until now we've been exploring texts, and I've been speaking somewhat informally and engaging in discussion. This is more of an actual lecture, but don't be scared. I don't think it'll be boring. It's just a little bit challenging and demanding because if I were going to speak about Kabbalah for 40 minutes, that would be challenging. If I were going to try to explain Big Bang cosmology to the extent that I could do that, that would be demanding. To do both of them together, it's asking a lot of an audience. But you're sitting down and you have stuff to munch on, and
you could do it on one foot.
So I'll ask you just to listen carefully, and we'll be able to engage in some discussion when I've finished. And I think at the end I'd like us just to pause for a moment or two, for a minute or two, just to have a little silent meditation together, to let the words sink in a little bit, and then we can discuss some of the ideas. In the beginning was the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago. The primordial vacuum was devoid of matter, but not really empty, rather in a state of minimum energy, pregnant with potential, teeming with virtual particles. Through a quantum fluctuation, a sort of bubble in this vacuum, there emerged a hot, dense seed, smaller than a proton, yet containing all the mass and energy of our universe. In less than a trillionth of a second, this seed cooled and expanded wildly, faster than the speed of light, inflating into the size of a grapefruit. The expansion then slowed down, but it has never stopped. In its first few seconds, the universe was an undifferentiated soup of matter and radiation. It took a few minutes for things to cool down enough for nuclei to form, and about 400,000 years for atoms to form. For eons, clouds of gas expanded. Huge glimmering balls of hot gas formed into stars. Deep within these stars, nuclear reactions gave birth to elements such as carbon and iron. When the stars grew old, they exploded, spewing these elements into the universe. Eventually, this matter was recycled into new solar systems. Our solar system is one example of this recycling, a mix of matter produced by cycles of stars, stars forming and exploding. We, along with everything else, are literally made of stardust. The Earth took shape and began cooling down about 4.5 billion years ago. By about 1 billion years later, various microorganisms had developed. Exactly how, no one knows. We do know that Earth's early atmosphere was composed of various microorganisms. We do know that Earth's early atmosphere was composed of hydrogen, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and simple gases such as ammonia and methane. In such a climate, organic compounds may have synthesized spontaneously, or perhaps life drifted to Earth in the form of spores from the planet Mars, or from another solar system in our galaxy, or another galaxy in the universe. However life began, all its forms share similar genetic codes and can be traced back to a common ancestor. All living beings are cousins. We humans like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation. And it's true, we are the most complicated things in the universe. Our brain contains 100 billion cells, linked by 100 trillion synaptic connections. Yet we are part of the evolutionary process, descended from single-cell organisms who lived 3.5 billion years ago. Our species, Homo sapiens, is a primate that developed in Africa, splitting away from the chimpanzee line about 7 million years ago. We still share with the chimps 99% of our active genes. If you'll pardon the expression, we are an improved ape. The Big Bang is a theory, not a fact. To cosmologists, it offers the most convincing explanation of the evolution of our universe, the best approximation to truth that we currently possess. It might be proven wrong. More likely, it will eventually be enfolded within some larger theory. The scientific consensus is that the Big Bang theory is correct, but within a specific realm. The evolution of our universe from perhaps 1/1,000,000,000 of a second after its origin up to the present. Whatever happened before that first fraction of a second lies beyond the limits of the theory. The term Big Bang suggests a definite beginning, a finite time ago, but the theory does not extend that far. The ultimate origin of our universe is still unfathomed. I think it's okay. I think I finally got it with,
I'm not.
yeah?
Sorry.
I think it's we'll just,
Yeah.
great, thank you. The ultimate origin of the universe is still unfathomed. Today, many cosmologists speculate about multiple universes, multiple beginnings. If that is so, then maybe we should translate the opening words of the Torah not as in the beginning, but in a beginning. God created heaven and earth. In fact, this could represent a more literal rendering, a more literal meaning of the original Hebrew. Bereshit, in a beginning. Science has no consensus on the ultimate origin. Some theories promote a well-defined beginning. Others, like Stephen Hawking's, do not. But both suggest a radically new reading of Genesis. If God spoke the world into being, the divine language is energy. The alphabet, elementary particles. God's grammar, the laws of nature. Many scientists have sensed a spiritual dimension in the search for these laws. For Einstein, discovering the laws of nature was a way to discover how God thinks. But does the universe have a purpose? Is there meaning to our existence? Why should we live ethically? Here, cosmology doesn't help us very much, and Charles Darwin intensifies our problem. Are we different from other animals? Can we transcend violence and savagery? As the wife of an Anglican bishop remarked upon hearing of Darwin's theory, descended from apes? My dear, let us hope that it is not true. But if it is, let us pray that it will not become generally known. Her comment echoes the fear that knowing the true nature of our ancestors threatens to unravel the social fabric. We have lost our myth. A myth is a story that helps us make our experience comprehensible by offering a construction of reality. A myth transforms chaos into order. It's a narrative that enables us to see things in some larger structure. We're not content to see events as unconnected, as inexplicable. We crave to understand some underlying order in the world. A myth tells us why things are the way they are, where they came from. Such an account is not only comfortable, assuring, and socially useful, it's essential. Without a myth, there is no meaning or purpose to life, just vast emptiness. Myths do more than explain. They guide our mind, conditioning how we think, even how we perceive. And myths come to life by serving as models for human behavior. On Friday evening, as my family begins Shabbat, I sometimes imagine God, having created the world in one very packed week, finally taking a break. Shavat vayinafash, the Torah says. God rested and was refreshed. This mythical image enables me to pause, to slow down, to appreciate creation. By observing Shabbat, I'm imitating the divine. Order reemerges out of the impending chaos of life. But what do we do when the myths of tradition have been undone? When the God of the Bible seems so unbelievable? Is there really someone up there in control, charting the course of history, reaching down to rescue those in need, tallying up our good and bad deeds for reward and punishment? Many people have shed the security of traditional belief. They're more likely to experience a gaping, aching void than the satisfying fullness of God's presence. If they believe in anything, perhaps it's science and technology. And what does science provide in exchange for that belief? Progress in every field except for one, the ultimate meaning of life. Many scientists insist that there is no meaning. As one leading physicist has written, the more we know about the universe, the more it is evident that it is pointless and meaningless. The Big Bang is a contemporary creation story. Energy turns into matter, which turns back into energy. There is no precise plan for creation worked out in advance. Rather, by an intricate and unrepeatable combination of chance and necessity, humanity has evolved from and alongside countless other forms of life over billions of years. But ultimately, our revolutionary history is really uplifting because it enables us to see that we are part of a wholeness, a oneness. To be religious means, in the words of another contemporary physicist, to have an intuitive feeling of the unity of the cosmos. This oneness is grounded in scientific fact. We are made of the same stuff as all of creation. Everything that is, was, or will be started off together as one infinitesimal point, the cosmic seed. Life has since branched out, but this should not blind us to its underlying unity. The deepest marvel is the unity in diversity, the vast array of material manifestations of energy. Becoming aware of this multifaceted unity can help us learn how to live in harmony with other human beings, with all beings, with all our fellow transformations of energy and matter. If the Big Bang is our new creation myth, the story that explains how the universe began, then who is God? God is a name we give to the oneness of it all. How can you name oneness? How can you name the unnameable? The Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, offers a number of possibilities. One is Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end. Ein Sof is the infinite, or to borrow a phrase from the great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, the God beyond God. Sometimes the Kabbalists use a more radical name than Ein Sof. This is the name Ayin, spelled Aleph, Yud, Nun, meaning nothingness. We encounter this bizarre term among Christian mystics too. John Scotus Erigena, writing in Latin, calls God nihil. Meister Eckhart in German calls this dimension of God nicht. John of the Cross, writing in Spanish, calls God nada. What does it mean to call God nothingness? This does not mean that God does not exist. Rather, it conveys the idea that God is no thing. God animates all things and cannot be contained by any of them. God is the oneness that is no particular thing, no thingness. This mystical nothingness is neither empty nor barren. It is fertile and overflowing, engendering the myriad forms of life. The mystics teach that the universe emanated from divine nothingness. Similarly, as we have seen, cosmologists speak of the quantum vacuum, teeming with potential, engendering the cosmic seed. This vacuum is anything but empty, a seething froth of virtual particles constantly appearing and disappearing. How did the universe emerge out of this prolific nothingness? According to Kabbalah and the Big Bang Theory, this transition was marked by a single point. Physicists call this point a singularity, an infinitely dense point in space-time. A singularity is both destructive and creative. Anything falling into a singularity merges with it, losing its identity, while energy emerging from a singularity can become anything. The laws of physics do not apply to that split second when energy or mass emerges. According to the 13th century Kabbalist Moses de Leon, quote, "The beginning of existence is the secret concealed point. This is the beginning of all the hidden things which spread out from there and emanate according to their species. From a single point, you can extend the dimensions of all things." As emanation proceeds, as God begins to unfold, the point expands into a circle. Similarly, ever since the Big Bang, our universe has been expanding. We know this thanks to the astronomer Edwin Hubble, who measured the speed at which other galaxies are moving away from us. In 1929, Hubble determined that the farther a galaxy is from us, the faster it's moving away. The universe is expanding in all directions. It's not that the universe is expanding within space. Space itself is somehow expanding. The most dramatic consequence of Hubble's discovery is what it tells us about the origin of our universe. Just play the Hubble tape in reverse. If the universe is now expanding, that means it was once much smaller. How small? According to Big Bang Theory, if we go back far enough in space-time, if we retrace the formation of the galaxies, the whole mass energy of the universe contracts into the size of a singularity, that infinitesimal point from which the cosmos flashed into existence. One Kabbalist, Shimon Lavi, understands expansion as part of the rhythm of creation. This is a very short passage we looked at last evening. Quote, "With the appearance of the light, the universe expanded. With the concealment of the light, the things that exist were created in all their variety. This is the mystery of the act of creation. One who understands will understand." In other words, there is an expansion, an explosion of light, but there the energy is moving away so fast there's no possibility for matter to form. It's only when that energy slows down, when it's concealed, or a scientist would say when it's congealed, that you are able to have the energy turn into stable particles of matter. When light flashed forth, time and space began. But the early universe was an undifferentiated soup of energy and matter. How did matter emerge from the stew? The mystic writes that the light was concealed. A scientist would say that energy congealed. Matter is frozen energy. No nucleus or atom could form until some of the energy cooled down enough that it could be bound and bundled into stable particles of matter. Einstein discovered the equivalence of mass and energy. Ultimately, matter is not distinct from energy, but simply energy that has temporarily assumed a particular pattern. Matter is energy, but in a tangible form. Both are different states of a single continuum, different names for two forms of the same underlying thing. Like the physicist, the mystic too is fascinated by the intimate relation of matter and energy. But the mystical description is composed, you might say, in a different key. Material existence emerges out of ayin, that pool of divine energy. Ultimately, the world is not other than God, because this divine energy is concealed within all forms of being. If it weren't concealed, there would be no individual existence. Everything would dissolve back into oneness or nothingness. Around the middle of the 16th century, in the mountaintop city of Tzfat, in Galilee, the most famous Kabbalist who ever lived, Isaac Luria, pondered creation, and he asked himself a question: what came before? Luria believed there was only Ein Sof, God as infinity. But if Ein Sof pervaded all space, how could there be room for anything other than God? So Luria concluded that the first act of creation was not the divine flow, not anything emerging, but rather withdrawal. Quote, before the creation of the universe, Ein Sof withdrew itself into its essence, from itself, to itself, within itself. Within its essence, it left an empty space in which it could emanate and create. Unquote. This is known in Hebrew as tzimtzum, a word that literally means contraction, but here suggests withdrawal, a withdrawal by which God made room for something other than God. That primordial void carved out by tzimtzum became the site of creation, no larger than an infinitesimal point in relation to the infinite, yet spacious enough to house the cosmos. But the void was not really empty. It retained a trace, a residue of the light of Ein Sof. Just as the vacuum preceding the Big Bang was not completely empty, but rather in a state of minimum energy, pregnant with creative potential and virtual particles. According to Kabbalah, as Ein Sof began to unfold, a ray of light was channeled into the void through vessels. Everything went smoothly at first, but some of the vessels, less translucent, could not withstand the power of the light, and they shattered. Most of the light then returned to its infinite source, to the mother's womb. But the rest fell as sparks, along with broken shards of the shattered vessels. And these sparks were eventually trapped in the material world. Our task, according to Kabbalah, is to liberate these sparks of light, to restore them to divinity. By living ethically and spiritually, we raise the sparks and thereby bring about tikkun, the repair or mending of the cosmos. If the vessels had not broken, our world of multiplicity would not exist. You could say that we exist as we are because we have lost that original oneness. Modern cosmology has a theory that parallels the breaking of the vessels. It's called the theory of broken symmetry. Something is symmetrical if it looks the same from different directions. For example, a snowflake rotated 60 degrees at a time. But symmetry, of course, can be unstable. Picture yourself at an elegant wedding dinner, sitting around a circular table with other guests. Champagne glasses have been placed precisely between each dinner plate and the next. You could call that perfect right-left symmetry. A waiter comes and fills the glasses with champagne, and everybody waits, waiting for someone else to take a sip. You're getting a little thirsty, realizing that those pink bubbles won't last forever. You decide to take a sip. But which champagne glass should you pick? If you're not fully versed in the rules of etiquette, you could as easily choose the glass to your left as the one to your right. Either way, as soon as you reach for one or the other, the symmetry is broken. Unless everyone else does exactly what you've done, someone's going to have to reach across the table to get a glass. Let's take a more mundane example. Imagine you're holding a handful of sharpened pencils, just snug enough that they stand upright. Now let go. For a moment, those pencils remain balanced, right on their points. But of course, the symmetry is quickly broken. The pencils fall into a tangle. Those pencils are really a metaphor for the whole universe. The jumble of fallen pencils is our universe today. That symmetrical bundle is the universe in its original state. One of the challenges of science is to discover the symmetry hidden within the confusion of ordinary life. The universe began in an extremely hot state of utmost simplicity and symmetry. As it expands and cools, this perfect symmetry is broken, giving rise to the world of diversity and structure that we inhabit. To us today, the fundamental forces of nature appear distinct: gravity, electromagnetism, and two other forces known as the strong and weak nuclear forces. The balance between these forces determines the existence of everything in the universe. But originally, all four forces were linked, and today there are many scientists who dream of finding a single set of equations describing all four. By colliding subatomic particles, physicists have discovered that at extremely high temperatures, the differences between the forces begin to disappear. One more act of imagination. Imagine yourself journeying back in time, closer and closer to the moment of the Big Bang. The further you go, the hotter and denser the universe becomes, and those broken symmetries are restored. You go back millions, billions of years. Finally, you reach the tiniest fraction of time that a physicist can imagine. 10 to the minus 43 second after the Big Bang. That's 1/10 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the beginning. Earlier than this is hard to probe. Why? The density of matter becomes so great that the structure and maybe the meaning of space and time just break down. At this point, all interactions between those fundamental forces are indistinguishable. Perfect symmetry. How did that perfect symmetry of Bereshit become so disguised over the course of time? As the universe expands and starts to cool, its radiation and particles lose energy. The various forces become distinct. Meanwhile, matter is also losing its oneness. By the time the universe is just 1/billionth of a second old, there are four forces and 24 kinds of elementary particles. This fracturing of symmetry creates the particles of matter and energy found today around us and within us. Perfect symmetry may sound alluring, but it is sterile. If the primal force had not broken into four forces, the universe would be a very different place, if it existed at all. It's those tiny deviations from complete oneness that now give rise to nuclei, atoms, molecules, then galaxies, stars, planets, and people. We exist today in our present condition, with all our flaws and imperfections, because of broken symmetry. Just as Kabbalah teaches that our jumbled, blemished reality derives from the breaking of the vessels. Broken symmetry and the breaking of the vessels are distinct theories, each generated by a different approach to the question of the origin of the universe. But their resonance is intriguing. Apparently, the human mind has devised alternative strategies, scientific and spiritual, to search for our origin. The two are distinct, but complementary. Science enables us to probe infinitesimal particles of matter and unimaginable depths of outer space, understanding each in light of the other as we grope our way back to the beginning. Spirituality guides us through inner space, challenging us to retrace our path to oneness and to live in the light of what we discover. As we've seen, the Jewish mystics picture divine sparks in everything that exists. A scientist would say there is energy latent in subatomic particles. But the spiritual task is to raise the sparks, to restore the world to God. In other words, to become aware that everything we do or see or touch or imagine is part of the oneness, a pattern of energy. Raising the sparks is a powerful metaphor. It transforms religion from a list of do's and don'ts or a list of dogmas into spiritual adventure. God is not some separate being up there. She is right here, in the leaf of a tree, in a friend's voice, in a stranger's eye. The world is teeming with God. Since God is in everything, we can serve God through everything. In looking for the divine spark, we discover that what is ordinary is really spectacular. The holy deed is doing what needs to be done right now. The world is fractured, and God needs us to mend it. In mending the world, socially, economically, politically, we mend God, whose sparks lie scattered everywhere. How will it all end? What's the long-range future of our planet, according to science? Here's the forecast. The sun is about 5 billion years old, middle-aged and reliable. But 5 billion years from now, the hydrogen fuel in the sun's core will run out. The core of the sun will sag, while its atmosphere will mushroom, engulfing several of its closest planets, including Earth. Gradually, most of that atmosphere will fall away, leaving a hot, dense ball of inert matter. Life will not necessarily come to an end. By then, human beings will probably have developed technology to move to another, safer solar system. Meanwhile, here we are. We still have quite a while until the year 5 billion. Chance will play a leading role in the way things unfold, as it always has. We should learn to negotiate with chance. We should work on mending our own brokenness, our social fabric, our planet, as best we can. What kind of God can we believe in? The Hebrew word emunah, belief, originally meant trust and faithfulness, both human and divine. Without trusting another person, we cannot love. Without trusting others, we cannot build and sustain community. But how can we trust the cosmos or this God of oneness? We can trust that we are part of something greater, a vast web of existence, constantly expanding and evolving. When we gaze at the nighttime sky, we can ponder that we are made of elements forged within stars, out of particles born in the Big Bang. We can sense that we are looking back home, because the further we gaze into space, the further we see back into time. If we see a galaxy 10 million light years away, we're not seeing that galaxy as it exists now. We're seeing it as it existed 10 million years ago. It's taken that long for its ancient light to arrive at our eyes. Beyond any star we will ever identify lies the horizon of space-time, 14 billion light years away. But neither God nor the Big Bang is that far away. The Big Bang didn't happen somewhere out there, outside of us. No, we began inside the Big Bang. We now embody its primordial energy. The Big Bang has never stopped. And what about God? God is not an object or a fixed destination. There's no definite way to reach God. But then again, you don't need to reach something that's everywhere. God is not somewhere else, hidden from us. God is right here, hidden from us. We are enslaved by our routines, rushing from event to event, from one chore to another. We rarely let ourselves pause to notice the splendor right in front of us. Our sense of wonder has shriveled, victimized by our pace of life. How then can we find God? A clue is provided by one of the many names of Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God, the divine presence. In Kabbalah, she is called ocean, well, garden, apple orchard. And she's also called Zot, which means simply this. God is right here, in this very moment, fresh and unexpected, taking us by surprise. God is this. Any questions? Is crystal clear or too confusing to start? Please.
Four forces.
The four fundamental forces. Yeah, according to physics, there are four fundamental forces. The one we come in contact with most directly, or that we sense most, is gravity. Electromagnetism, because electricity and magnetism were seen toward the end of the 19th century as one force, the electromagnetic spectrum, so visible light and X-rays, microwaves, gamma rays, all those forms of radiation under the umbrella of electromagnetism. And then two nuclear forces. One is called the strong force, binding the nucleus together, and the weak force, which is involved in radioactive decay. So those are the four forces, and physicists are dreaming of combining them all or finding the equation that would apply or explain all of them as one.
Kabbalistically, what would be somewhat
you can find parallels. You can say four worlds and four forces. Possibilities emerge of parallels. I mentioned a few that strike me: the broken symmetry and breaking of the vessels, the vacuum and the no-thingness. But I'm not so insistent or even eager to match up all of them. But what interests me there is the fact that the four were one and they divided, and you have that initial oneness splitting in both Kabbalah and cosmology. Yes?
How do you define spirituality? Well, I suppose you have to define spirit before.
How would I define spirituality? I guess, seeing beyond the physical. So spiritual seems to have some contrast to the physical. Most people are content to, be defined by physical phenomena and to relate to physical phenomena. So someone who's spiritually inclined is dissatisfied with that surface layer, is trying to penetrate the surface layer of reality, of personality, of the text, of the Torah, to not be satisfied with the pshat, with the simple meaning or the simple apparent form of things, to look within, to search within for something deeper. Yeah.
When you describe the contraption and then the outward radiation, do you think that there's a relationship with that and the breath, the act of breathing, and is there a Kabbalistic practice where that comes in?
how does that contraction and expansion relate to breathing? Some of the Kabbalists speak of God's creating the world as an inhalation and an exhalation. God inhaling and then breathing the world into existence. I mean, you have that in terms of the creation of Adam and Eve, right? God breathing the neshama, breathing the breath or the soul into Adam, the beginning of Genesis. So there you have it in terms of human creation. The Kabbalah expands that to creating the world. Creating the world, God inhales maybe to prepare, and then the exhalation is an effulgence, an emanation, a flow of divine energy. So your own breath could certainly be a model for that. There are breathing techniques in Kabbalah. One is to picture the divine name, Yud He Vav He. So Yud is inhaling and kind of contracting all the energy to a point, and He really sounds like an exhalation. Hey. So Yud He, Vav would be then maybe the entire spine, aligning the whole spine with the next breath, and again exhaling is He. So double breath would get you through the four-letter name of God, the Yud He Vav He. And Abraham Abulafi has a number of more complicated techniques involving the breath. I like to keep things simple. Kabbalah can get over-complexified very easily, and the thing I try most in my writing and teaching is to keep it simple, but breathing is about as simple as you can get. And we do it all day without being aware of it, so to bring awareness to the breath certainly works. And that brings me back to spirituality. That word neshama is so beautiful because it means both breath and soul. So the same word in Hebrew meaning breath and soul, that's just an invitation to turn your breath into a meditative spiritual practice. Yes?
Thank you. Prayer. Would you today, in time, maybe you go to God and we talk about our Father or King and so forth, would you recommend there be an alternative set of words and prayers and psalms that may better connect with a Kabbalistic sentiment?
Mm-hmm. What would be an effective form of prayer based on Kabbalah? This came up last night a little bit, so I'll repeat a bit of what I said, but maybe it adds some elements and put it in a new light. People often ask me, what are the actual techniques of Kabbalah? This sounds like interesting philosophy, and it's very colorful and imaginative. But what were the mystical practices the Kabbalists followed? Now there are meditative practices, as we began to talk about a minute ago. But basically, the practices of the Kabbalists were the mitzvot. Right? The normal mitzvot of Torah, of Judaism, were now filled with new meaning. So the Kabbalists would do what you're supposed to do as a Jew, but with the intention of affecting the upper worlds, with the intention of drawing close to God. So in terms of prayer, Kabbalistic prayer would be the prayers in the Siddur, but focusing on the divine name. But I want to move in a simpler direction. I think we need a number of elements. One is to bring silence back into prayer. Okay, and there definitely there are descriptions of silent meditation in very early Jewish sources, what are called the ancient Hasidim, ancient devotees in rabbinic times, would meditate for an hour before starting prayer. They would do the normal prayers, but that was part two. Part one was an hour of silent meditation. It's to bring silent meditation back into the synagogue. There are rabbis around the country, and a number of them sitting right here in this room, who are doing that, have been doing that for years, to bring silence, to incorporate silence into prayer. But then you come to the words themselves. I don't think it's a matter of necessarily bringing new words. There may be new words, there may be new readings. Kabbalistic teachings themselves can be a focus for meditation. But I think what we need to do is to be selective with the material that's in the prayer book. Okay, there may be an entire psalm, and there'll be one phrase, one word, one verse that really becomes a meditative practice. One I mentioned last night, Be'orcha nir'eh or. In your light we see light. If you read that and immediately rush on to the next line, the next psalm, next page, then it's, you've lost it. If you sit with those pregnant, potent lines, and those become mantras, those become focus for meditations, I think the meditative material is there. It's just, it's dissolved in this ocean of words. So to be selective with the words that are there, to look for the beautiful parts of Psalms, it's really the very beginning of the service. People usually come to service after the first half hour or hour and a half, and the beautiful poetic passages are at the very beginning. So for those to take center stage, for those to become the core of the service, I think would really help to address the problem.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yes, there's Kabbalah and talking about the ultimate unity of everything because of broken vessels being, does deal with evil, also being part of the ultimate unity of all things. You mentioned the fighting unity of the look of a friend, but there's also the look of a Stalin or a Hitler or a Mao, who all of them, by the way, were also engaged in their own views and ways in tikkun as they saw it.
Yeah, how does Kabbalah address evil, and how is that evil part of the oneness? I don't think there's any adequate explanation of evil. I don't think there's a theological or metaphysical satisfying explanation of evil, but I could just tell you a few things Kabbalah says about evil. Evil in Kabbalah is the product of an imbalance. Right? The whole point of Kabbalah is to balance the contending forces, to balance the opposite forces. The main polarity in Kabbalah is love and judgment. God's free-flowing love, and then limitation or constriction. Now, it may sound like love is good and constriction is bad, but it's more complicated than that. Love itself might be overwhelming. Think of someone who's loved you with a love that just doesn't leave you space to be yourself. A kind of drowning love or smothering love. That would be, an excess of love that would be too much to bear. Of course, in constriction or limitation, it's easier to see how that would be negative. But ideally, the limitation channels the love. So if you express love, but in a way that is bearable by the other person, in a way that shows that you're sensitive to what the object of your love is ready to receive, that would be a balance between love and limitation, love and definition. That would lead you to a place of harmony. So according to Kabbalah, evil will lash out into the world if there's not enough love and there's too much constriction or judgment. That's seen as an imbalance that will empower love. But what causes that imbalance? Human action. So somehow human wickedness empowers a metaphysical force of evil in the world. That's what Kabbalah would say. But I would say more critically that we should stop thinking of evil as some force out there, some metaphysical reality. I think the evil we have to contend with is not earthquakes. It's not cancer. I don't mean we don't need to contend with cancer. I mean we shouldn't see cancer as evil. We should see cancer as something we need to fight. But that's not God punishing somebody, punishing some child because the parents didn't fulfill the right number of mitzvot. That to me seems an obscene, justification of evil. I think but the evil we need to focus on is the evil that is the result of human action. So humans act in positive or negative ways, and that brings us back to free will. We have the choice at each moment about how to convey this divine energy that we embody. So we need ethical guidelines. We need some system of, if not halakha, some system of daily living, some code that we can follow so that we make the right choices. I would just say to put the emphasis on human action and not God causing evil. I'm really trying to reimagine God, right? Not as someone up there who runs the show, but as the energy that animates the universe. So not blaming that energy for what happens, but saying it's up to us to channel that energy in positive or negative ways. Ellen.
One of our members here at Romemu, Daniel Wolfsaven, who's actually a bass player in the community band, is an astrophysicist at Columbia University, about 10 blocks north of here. And he gave a lecture recently on what they're doing in their Columbia Astrophysics Lab, which is recreating the Big Bang in a space that's about as big as this area between the columns. And from what I recall from the video, it's like a glass or tube that goes around the room, and they put gases into it, and they can heat it up to that incredible temperature where it is actually forming matter. While it goes, the gas goes around,
Right.
and I was thinking, like, what does that mean in context of what you're saying? Because they're working on humans creating the creation. And if humans can create the creation, then is God necessary? I guess that's my question to you. So, it's like, we can get to the point where we can do it, as human scientists, astrophysicists can do it. Does it prove that God didn't exist? Does it prove that we now have such a role in our own part of creation? Does that scare you, or does it excite you, or what?
Yeah. So what's the relationship between human creativity or human brilliance and this entity we call God? I would say, that if God is not up there, okay, if God is in us and in everything, God is animating us, God is part of our intelligence. So our intelligence is a manifestation of that divine force. You might say that God, one explanation of why did God create the world, God was a little bit lonely. Okay, there was only God. There was nothing that God could relate to. God was this ocean of infinite oneness, and it got a little boring. So there's this dance of existence in which God pretends to be separate. Each of us grows up thinking, I'm separate from my neighbor. I'm separate from the other. I'm separate from God up there. And then there's a process of spirituality, of spiritual search, in which we feel we're part of something greater. We are each a manifestation of the divine. You might even say we are each an incarnation of the divine. Okay, we're sitting in a church. As I mentioned yesterday, the Kabbalistic critique of Christianity, it's not that Jesus, was evil, not that Jesus was wicked, not that Jesus was a heretic. Jesus discovered his intimacy with God. Jesus discovered that he was part of the divine. But then either he or his followers fell into the trap of worshiping that one manifestation of the divine as if it was the divine. So I think each of us is an incarnation of the divine, and we come to express that divine brilliance, that divine energy in a unique way. Then there's certain individuals who do it artistically, there's certain who do it scientifically, and if there's scientific breakthroughs, I think that's something in which God celebrates. God is celebrating that manifestation of brilliance in terms of light and brilliance in terms of insight. Yes, in the back, and then you.
Who amongst the Kabbalists before Reb Zalman says such a thing about Jesus?
Did any Kabbalists have a positive appreciation of Jesus before Zalman? Abraham Abulafia has some coded references to Jesus. To find positive evaluation of Jesus, there certainly were people. I mean, Buber speaks very positively about Jesus.
Certainly not a Kabbalist.
Buber wasn't a Kabbalist. Buber, was really trying to bring Hasidism to the West. But in a sense, Buber wanted to bring Hasidism to the West, and Hasidism is the popularization of Kabbalah. But Buber would not have called himself a Kabbalist. A Kabbalist who called himself a Kabbalist and came out and said explicitly something positive about Jesus, it'd be hard to find. Yes?
I'm just wondering, would it be fair to equate the process of the creation of the universe to the process of conception, birth, and human development? I mean, Carl Jung said that we're here to individuate, and we start off as sort of like this, non-differentiated, whatever, and then we become, and then like the process of life itself is a sort of soul articulation. Is that like a parallel process?
Birth and the creation of the universe? Yeah.
Birth and human development are just a whole conception.
Yeah, certainly. I think, if we let go, if we let go of the patriarchal view of God, so the world being born, Lurie actually uses this image. I just said it very quickly in passing, but that the sparks return to the mother's womb. So Lurie describes that as giving birth, and Kabbalah speaks of divine parents, Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah is the father, and Bina is the mother. Bina is the mother who gives birth to the universe, to the lower Sfirot, but then to the world, and Shekhinah is seen as the mother of the world. So, the only thing we know, our experience of creation, right, we weren't there, in a sense we were all there at the moment of the Big Bang, but we don't necessarily remember it. We don't remember our own birth, but certainly the birth of the universe, and that seems like a natural connection. I want to say something just momentarily about gravity, because this, I gather that we don't have copies of my book. I think they sold.
We just have the Essential Kabbalah here.
There's some Essential Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the book God and the Big Bang, the reason this lecture this morning was a little bit cruel is that I was scrunching the entire book into 40 minutes. This is based on my book God and the Big Bang, and a second edition, I wrote the book about 20 years ago. But this past year I did a revised edition, and the main change I made was updating the cosmology, but I came up with a certain understanding of gravity that I just want to share with you. Gravity seems like the most mundane thing possible, right? Like, toward the end of my talk, a piece of paper fell, or a couple pieces of paper fell. All the talk I was trying to balance it because this music stand has kind of an empty spot in the middle. I was trying to keep the papers balanced. Finally, gravity won out, right? And it fell. So what is gravity? We think of gravity as, something that very inconveniently makes your keys fall down or drop, and things drop and get lost, and that's gravity. What a pain. Or your child falls, or gravity sounds so mundane and so unspiritual. But gravity is really amazing, because think of it this way: when, if you drop something, where is it falling really? It's not falling on the ground. It's falling toward what? It's falling down several stories. It's falling toward to the earth, but it's not really falling to the surface of the earth. Where is it heading? It's falling toward the center of the planet. Anything that falls anywhere on Earth is falling toward the center of the Earth. But it's not really stopping there, because the whole Earth is really being drawn by gravity toward where? The sun. Well, let's stay local for the moment. So the Earth is falling toward the sun. It doesn't go to the sun because it's moving fast enough to make an orbit around the sun. But the sun is drawing the entire Earth and everything that we drop and everything that falls toward the center of the sun. Of course, the sun is being drawn toward the center of the galaxy, to the black hole at the middle of the Milky Way. So the sun and all the planets and everything in the Milky Way galaxy is being drawn toward the center. Actually, and everything is revolving around the center. Everything in the Milky Way is revolving around the center of the Milky Way. I mentioned yesterday that takes about 250 million years for one circuit. That's one galactic day. Every 250 million years, everything completes one circuit around the center. But of course, the whole Milky Way is also being drawn by gravity. Where? The center of the universe. But there really is no center of the universe. A cosmologist would say that there is no one center, but in a sense, everything in the universe is being drawn back to the point, the singularity, the moment of the Big Bang. Now, not everything is actually moving in that direction because of what's called dark energy. Dark energy is the force that works against gravity, and that is keeping the universe expanding and apparently even accelerating. So there's this expansion of the universe and the contraction. You talked about contraction and expansion a few minutes ago. So the contraction is gravity pulling everything back toward the beginning of the Big Bang, and that's being balanced and really outweighed at the moment by the dark energy that's causing it to expand. So gravity is what? Gravity is everything yearning to return to oneness. That's not some far out spiritual description. That's a scientific description of gravity. Gravity is everything yearning to become one again. It's being counteracted by the expansion of the universe. And we're still actually not totally sure what will happen eventually. Right now, the scientific consensus is that the dark energy is more powerful than gravity, and the universe will expand and even accelerate. That has been the consensus since about 1998. But I saw 2 weeks ago, one team of cosmologists said, no, they got it wrong. And they weren't looking at enough galaxies when they did that comparison. And actually the dark energy isn't strong enough. And eventually the gravity will come back, will force us all to come back. That would be nice. That would be more Kabbalistic if it were cyclical. If there were a pattern of expansion and contraction and multi Big Bangs, one after the other. We don't know. We won't find out for quite a while. But gravity itself is the yearning for oneness. Yes?
Speaking of multiple Big Bang, that was my next question. That was my question. Because when they observe the Big Bang, they see it, as you said, 30.7 billion years ago, 40 billion years ago. They see it.
Yeah, maybe stand up so that all I know.
The scientists observe the Big Bang, like it's not a theory, they see it. It happened 30.7 billion years ago. So it's 30.7 billion light years away. But apparently they see something before it. Like there's a red hue, like there's a coloring that occurs with the age of the event.
Mm-hmm.
And so the darker the red or something, like the longer it took place further back in time. And I saw at the Museum of Natural History that they had observed something before the Big Bang, some kind of red hue.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I wondered, what do you think about it? First of all, applied to the Kabbalah, and secondly, just from a scientific perspective, if there's something going on before the Big Bang, what does that mean about the Big Bang?
Mm-hmm.
Does it mean maybe there's been multiple Big Bangs? I mean,
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't really come up with
Yeah. What happened before the Big Bang? You know, the only thing I think we really can say is that we don't know. But you know, some cosmologists say that you can't. That's not a legitimate question to ask what came before the Big Bang. I mean, Hawking and others say that time began at the Big Bang. Even to use the word time is already to work within that realm of discourse once the singularity has exploded. But, you know, a cosmologist really would have to say, honestly, we don't know. I think just the two options now are that, you know, there'll be this cyclical creation and destruction, a Big Bang, expansion, eventually gravity bringing everything back to what's called the Big Crunch. There'll be a big crunch leading to another Big Bang. And there are reputable cosmologists who still think that's more likely. A fellow Paul Steinhardt at Princeton. Steinhardt and Neil Turok, they have a book called The Endless Universe. And they're aware of this theory that there's dark energy and expansion and acceleration. But they think, no, in a certain number of trillions of years, there will be an eventual contraction and another Big Bang. So they think there's an eternal series of Big Bangs. And I say that is more in line with Kabbalah. Kabbalah calls those the Shmitot. You know, the Shemitah is a sabbatical year. Every 7 years you should let the land lie fallow and not plant, not harvest. But Kabbalah speaks of cosmic cycles, not 6 years, but 6,000 years. So the Talmud says the world exists for 6,000 years, and then for 1,000 years it lies fallow. Okay, so now we're at 5777. It won't be too long to get to year 6,000. Our great-great-grandchildren may be able to find out if at the year 6,000 there'll be, or is it, you know, billions and billions and billions of years. So if it turns out that we're in a cyclical universe, that is more in line with Kabbalah. Right now the scientific consensus is that there's expansion and acceleration, and there won't be a big crunch. I'm hoping for the big crunch because it's more in line with Kabbalah. But I think we have to be, you know, humble and honest enough to say we don't know, and just to read cosmologists and to read cosmologists who are somewhat open to the spiritual perspective, without that, you know, skewing their science too much. There's so many questions, good questions. I think we'll take another, you know, 3 or 4 questions, and then I'll continue informally. But please, you go.
I just wanted to say, when you spoke about that, it reminded me of Hindu mythology.
Of what?
Hindu mythology.
Of Hindu mythology, of the cycles. Yes.
Hindu mythology,
Sure.
there's,
Yes.
the universe, it just keeps on.
Right, with huge eons of time. Right. So Kabbalah and Hinduism are in line there, and Steinhardt's cosmology as well. So we'll see what the scientific consensus is year by year. Please.
Is there anything we learned from the fact that Hubble also created the Hubble bubble?
I'm sorry?
Is there anything we learned from the fact that Hubble also created the Hubble bubble?
The Hubble bubble.
Creating Hubble bubbles.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Just sort of two parts. Like, is there
Stand up, please.
yeah, is there a way to define a little more the Shekhinah? Like, do you see it as, in Jungian, conscious, or just some...
Yeah, Shekhinah, sure. I focused on that Friday evening, but I'm happy to give a very brief synopsis. Shekhinah, I think, is one of the great contributions of the Kabbalah. Okay, they don't come up with a name, they don't come up with a term. Unlike Ein Sof. Ein Sof was really invented by the Kabbalists, that name. No one uses that phrase, Ein Sof, to describe God before the Kabbalah. Shekhinah, you don't find in the Torah, but you find very frequently in the Talmud and the Midrash. There it means the presence of God in the world. So God's immanence, God's presence in the world, right? Shekhinah, Shekhinah is found everywhere. Shekhinah is God manifesting on earth. But what's new in Kabbalah is that Shekhinah is the feminine half of God. It's one of the great breakthroughs of Kabbalah, to balance the patriarchal description of God with the feminine. And there's a romance within God of the masculine and the feminine. That romance is not consummated except through human action. If we act ethically, if we act spiritually, then we unite the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, and Shekhinah. So it's up to Israel, or it's up to humanity in a more universal reading, to make God really manifested in the world. And that connects with one of the names of Shekhinah I mentioned that most people have never heard of, because you don't find it, I've never seen it in any English book, except books that I've written. Sod HaEfshar, the secret of the possible.
Who's the source of that?
The secret of the possible is a 14th century Kabbalist, David ben Yehuda Chassid, who's a grandson of the Ramban. He writes a commentary on the Torah in which he calls Shekhinah the secret of the possible. So I take that to mean that God is waiting to become real in the world, but that needs human beings acting ethically, acting, to bring about tikkun. That actualizes the divine potential. It's a beautiful activist theology. Yeah.
So when we talk about the Big Bang and Milky Way, what about how we relate to the universe beyond the Milky Way?
Yeah, no, right. The Big Bang is not responsible just for the Milky Way. The Milky Way, right, is our local galaxy. The Big Bang is to describe all galaxies in the universe. Now, there may be other universes, okay, but universe really means, when most cosmologists say universe, they mean the Milky Way and hundreds of billions of other galaxies, each of which has hundreds of billions of stars. So any star that we can see with our naked eye is in the Milky Way. With our eye, we can't see other stars. With telescopes, you can see other galaxies, not so many of those. But right, the Milky Way is just one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, all of which are the result of the Big Bang that we're talking about. So it's not just responsible for our local neighborhood. I want to call on people who haven't had a chance to ask it. Please, Joe.
Last night you talked a bit about pantheism and pantheism. And as I'm listening to you and I'm hearing the sort of God as energy within the universe, I'm wondering if you think that there's really a practical distinction. Not a theoretical distinction, but a practical distinction between pantheism and pantheism. Yeah,
just to summarize, pantheism, you often hear, that God is the universe. Literally, pan, all, theos, all is God, or God is everything. Right? And Spinoza really saw God as nature, God as the universe. And Einstein really adopted Spinoza's theology. So that could be called pantheism. Some scholars try to make a fine distinction between pantheism, God is everything, and panentheism, pan-en-theos, all is within God. So somehow God includes everything, but God also is beyond everything. I think the reason people came up with that term panentheism was so to save a little bit of transcendence, to save an element of transcendence. Don't reduce God to the world. God animates the world, God fills the world, but there's something of the divine that is beyond the sum of all the parts. So you could say it's kind of a quibble, but I think what's useful about it is to not to reduce God to material existence. Okay, if you say if you say pantheism, but there's still a sense of wonder of awe and wonder about the divine, I don't think it makes much difference. You say pantheism or panentheism. If you're saying, God is just matter, that seems to miss out on the energy that hasn't yet become matter. And then maybe there's some use for the distinction. But I would agree with you practically, they're pretty much saying the same thing. Meryl.
Going back to the shards and Jesus, when all the do the Kabbalists believe that we could put back all the shards in a messianic way?
It's very interesting. Tikkun and Mashiach. In a sense, Tikkun is a practical way to bring about Mashiach, and that would almost make it that it's up to us to build Mashiach. It's not that you should wait for the Messiah to come. It's more of an activist mysticism, and you get some of that feeling with Luria. With Luria, it's like we have to rebuild the structure of the cosmos. If we raise all the sparks, we'll bring back the unity. And you might say, well, what happens to the beauty of difference, right? Vive la différence. There's something so delicious about gender and the duality and overcoming duality, the yearning for union. Will you miss the yearning for union if you have total union? But Luria does really describe an activist messianic agenda. And I think that my favorite description of this is something from the 20th century Jewish mystic Franz Kafka. I think some of you have picked up that I kind of like to claim the many people, Jewish mystics, Einstein and Jesus. But Kafka was influenced by Buber and influenced by Rabbi Nachman. Buber's tales, Kafka read some of Buber's tales of Rabbi Nachman in the 19-teens in Prague. But Kafka says a beautiful thing about the Mashiach. He says, the Messiah will come on the day after his arrival. He'll come when he's no longer necessary. And that really conveys Luria's activist mysticism. It's up to us to bring about tikkun. We should restore, we should redeem the world. And then maybe as icing on the cake, something will show up and be the Messiah. But in effect, we're creating the Messianic reality.
So we are all the Messiah.
We are all the Messiah. And Abulafia, Abraham Abulafia speaks about finding the Mashiach within yourself. So that there is precedent for.
Was
Yes.
Abulafia Jewish?
Yeah, Abraham Abulafia was a Kabbalist, somewhat of a renegade. He was a little too wild for even the other Kabbalists. He had his own meditative system. He probably thought that he was helping to bring the Mashiach, or maybe that he was the Mashiach. He actually went to Rome and demanded an audience with the Pope because he thought he had something to tell the Pope about the return of the Mashiach. And when the Vatican heard about that, they imprisoned him, and he was actually condemned to death. But he never was killed because before they could execute him, the Pope suddenly died. And they threw Abulafia out of prison and sent him on his way, but he wasn't welcomed warmly in the Jewish community either because of his messianic pretensions or because he was teaching Kabbalistic secrets to anyone and everyone. Now, in the last 20, 30 years, his books have been printed. They were always just kept in manuscript and not printed. They've been printed in Hebrew, and a good number of them have been translated. But a very complex system, a lot of gematria, a lot of numerology, a lot of letter mysticism. But he has some beautiful things, and one thing he says is that everyone should find the Mashiach or the Messianic element within him or herself.
My guru used to quote him.
Uh-huh. He was a very, very, very profound teacher. Yes?
You're trying to create a bridge between science and mysticism. And there's fundamentalists on Christian, Jewish, all across the spectrum, that there's a point in which fundamentalists won't accept science.
Sure.
And what I'm interested in is, where does that point occur? What makes what fundamentalists believe so consistent with the possibility that science exists?
Mm-hmm. What really divides fundamentalism from science? I think it's basically a literal reading of Scripture. If you say the pshat, the literal simple meaning, is the end, the total meaning of the Bible, it's very hard to accept the insights of science. If you're open to a creative reading, right, and Judaism really survived because it adopted creative readings of Scripture. Right? The Torah says, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The rabbi said God could not have meant that. It must mean monetary compensation. So that's Midrash. That's applying Midrash to the Torah. Judaism stayed alive. Judaism thrived because it was willing to expand the meaning of Torah. And literalists or fundamentalists at every stage really died out. Okay, the Sadducees lost out to the Pharisees. The Pharisees were promoting creative reading of Scripture. The Karaites lost out to the Rabbinites because the Karaites wanted to stay within the literal meaning of Torah. So if you're open to a midrashic reading of Torah, I think it's possible to make that bridge. But I would say more broadly, what I'm really asking is for scientists and believers to learn from one another. So in a simple sense, what can scientists learn from religious believers? To cultivate a sense of wonder, to cultivate a sense of awe. And the greatest scientists had this. Newton, Einstein. Right? Einstein got a lot of his ideas sailing on the lake in Switzerland. And Newton describes himself. Newton says, I don't know what other people think of me, but I think of myself as a little boy on the beach, picking up a shell, looking at an amazing shell, and out there is the vastness of the ocean that I don't even comprehend. So his sense of wonder, but aware of how little he knows. What can religious people learn from science? The dogmas don't necessarily have to retain a hold on you if they're proven wrong. But how does science make progress? By proving itself wrong. Right? Theories are proposed as hypothesis, as experiment, and a true scientist is thrilled when his pet theory is falsified. Now, of course, ego comes into play a little bit, and people want to win the Nobel Prize, but science makes progress by constantly proving itself wrong, and religion seems so hesitant to do that. So I think we have to be willing to update our theology, to update our understanding of what God is, and that's happened throughout Jewish history. We have an evolution of theology. But people usually say, okay, up to here, no further, this is now what we believe. And fortunately, Judaism is not locked into dogma to the extent that many other religions are. I think one more question for now, someone who hasn't gotten to ask it, and then we'll continue informally. Please.
So, do you think that, okay. I think that the Talmud has a lot of things in it that most people, when they study the Talmud, they think it's very about halakha, very about minute detail, and I don't. I think that it's a whole mystical thing going on in there under the surface that we can't fully see unless we are willing to go there.
Right.
And coupled with that, there's a lot of mystical tradition that comes through the Jewish faith, and these are really two questions, but I'm trying to make it one for you so that I can. But really, my question now is: do you think that the truth of mysticism, the truth that we're trying to teach, is the same throughout, or it actually changes over time? And like, if we look at Sefer Yetzirah, or we look at Hechalot literature, and then we look at the Zohar, and then we look at the Ari, if we look at all of these pieces, are they just different stories to explain the same phenomenon? Or are there actual changes? And in addition to that, can a mystical experience today teach you something different? Like, could something have changed in the fabric of the universe that makes a mystical experience today different than what it would have been? Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I knew I should have stopped with the last question. Yeah, so is Kabbalah really new? Kabbalah, Hasidism, is the mystical tradition offering something new, or is it just discovering things that are buried there in Job or in the Talmud? And, it's funny, when I was working on the Zohar translation over the past 87 years, or the past couple decades. Often I would come across something so startling in the Zohar, and I would say, how could he have come up with this? But it was really just from the Midrash. It was from Breshit Rabbah. It was the Midrash on Genesis, or something in the Talmud. So it's often true that the radical teachings, the things that seem so radical in Hasidism or in Kabbalah, are there in Psalms or in Job or in the Talmud. Not always, but I think often. Often what the Kabbalah is doing is taking something that's maybe just one line, but taking it and running with it, taking it and expanding it. Something like, that God needs us. It's one of the radical insights of Kabbalah. I think I mentioned the first night, Thursday night, I see three great contributions of Kabbalah. God is Ein Sof, God is infinity. No divine name really does justice to God. The balance of the feminine with the masculine to make up for the millennia of patriarchal religion with Shekhinah. And the third is that God needs us. God is incomplete without our participation. So that's a radical insight of the Kabbalah, but you do find roots of it in the Talmud, but relatively rarely. So something that's rare, that might be a one-liner, buried in the Talmud, becomes a major theme in the Kabbalah. Something like Galut HaShekhinah, that the Shekhinah is in exile. That was taught by Rabbi Akiva. Wherever Israel goes in exile, Shekhinah is with them. So it's one line, and Rabbi Shimon, the real Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's a student of Rabbi Akiva, repeats that line. So you find it in the Talmud and Midrash a couple times, but in the Zohar it's every few pages. What does this mean? The exile of Shekhinah. How can we overcome that exile? How can we redeem her? And maybe it also means the exile of the feminine. Not just the exile of Shekhinah, but the feminine has been exiled. So the move toward equality is also overcoming the exile of the feminine, redeeming her. So something like that. It's often the case that it's one line or one phrase or one image, and the Zohar builds it. So it's developing it from roots. It's roots that then grow. It's rare that you have a totally new idea. Okay, it's much more frequent that it's finding that seed in the earlier literature, but letting it sprout. And that's a lot of other creativity, and that really is another example of what I mentioned a few times already, new ancient words. Right? The Zohar calls its teachings Milin Chadatin Atikin. Milim Chadashot Atikot. New ancient words. So the Zohar is aware that it's new, but it's not totally new. It's radical because of the real meaning of radical, right? We all know radical comes from the meaning root. So something is radical if it goes back to the root and then lets it flourish in a new way. So there is an evolution that's going on, but you can't have evolution without the origin, without the seed. So being aware of that whole process, being aware that you can have transformation by returning to this most ancient source possible. It's like this claim that how old is the Zohar? The Zohar doesn't really go back to the 2nd century. The Zohar was written in medieval Europe, but it does recover something very primordial, even older than the 2nd century. Maybe it goes back in a sense to Adam and Eve. It's a way for us to reconnect with our most primal root. So is that new or ancient? It's radically new because it's striving. It's striving to connect with the most ancient. Thank you.
Everybody who's been attending these wonderful lectures and study programs has been affected from Thursday until now. And the only sad thing about having a visiting scholar is that the scholar goes home. But perhaps just as God withdraws from the empty space and leaves traces, I know Dr. Matt has left us all with powerful traces of wisdom and learning. So, and another way to continue that learning is to study with us in the well, which is another name for Shekhinah, which we learned today. All kinds of courses, Talmud, writing, Kabbalah on Tuesday nights, our open community Beit Midrash, Hebrew, and much more. So on behalf of Rabbi David Ingber, Rabbi Jessica Kate Meyer, our Adult Education Committee, the chairs, Kim Schneiderman, Ron Rogel and the Rogels for contributing and sponsoring.